The letter arrived on a blustery October morning in 1878, the elegant script a stark contrast to the news it delivered. Julia Matthews's husband of 2 years was dead, killed in a mining accident 300 miles from their Boston home, in a town she'd never heard him mention. Julia stared at the paper, her hands trembling as she read the words again. Edward had told her he was traveling to New York on business, not to some obscure mining operation in Nevada. It was the first of many lies she would uncover about the man she'd married, Mrs. Matthews. The messenger boy shifted uncomfortably at her doorstep, his cap clutched in his hands. "Will there be a reply, madam?" "No," Julia whispered, pressing a coin into his palm. "No reply." She closed the door and leaned against it, sliding to the floor as her legs gave way. The letter contained something else, a train ticket to Paradise, Nevada, where Edward had apparently owned property and held investments that required her immediate attention. Paradise. The irony of the name wasn't lost on her. At 24 years old, Julia Matthews faced a future entirely different from the one she'd imagined. The comfortable Boston life she'd been promised was built on fabrications. Edward's banking position, his family connections, the fortune he claimed would provide for them, all of it questionable now. 2 weeks later, Julia stood on the platform of the Paradise station, dust swirling around her skirts as she descended from the train. The journey had been long and difficult, forcing her to trade her fashionable traveling suit for a simpler, more practical dress. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her green eyes shadowed with exhaustion and grief. Mrs. Matthews. A heavy-set man in a worn suit approached, introducing himself as Herbert Wilson, the local attorney. "My condolences for your loss. I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house. We can discuss your husband's affairs tomorrow." "I'd prefer to discuss them now," Julia said firmly, surprising herself with her resolve. "I've traveled a long way, Mr. Wilson, and I find myself with more questions than answers." Wilson's expression tightened. "As you wish. My office isn't far." Julia followed him down the dusty Main Street, acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. Paradise was nothing like Edward had described in his letters. There were no grand avenues, no promising business district. Just a small mining town clinging to existence in the harsh Nevada landscape. Wilson's office was as modest as the town itself. He gestured Julia to a chair and shuffled through papers on his desk. "Mrs. Matthews, I regret to inform you that your husband's situation was complicated." "In what way?" "Edward Matthews arrived in Paradise 8 months ago, claiming to represent Eastern investors. He purchased several mining claims and became quite involved in local affairs." Wilson paused, clearly uncomfortable. "However, it appears the money he used wasn't his own." "There are creditors, Mrs. Matthews, significant debts." Julia felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. My husband was a banker with a respected Boston family." Wilson's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I've made inquiries, madam. There is no record of Edward Matthews working for any bank in Boston, and the family name he claimed, well, they've never heard of him. This can't be true." But even as she protested, pieces began falling into place. Edward's vague explanations about his work, his reluctance to introduce her to colleagues, the way they'd moved twice in their short marriage. "I'm afraid there's more," Wilson continued. "The property deed is in your name. Edward transferred it just days before his death. It's the only asset not being claimed by creditors." "What property?" "A small ranch about 5 miles outside town. Not much, but it's legally yours." "A ranch?" Julia's head swam. "I know nothing about ranching." "There's a manager, Owen Evans. He's been running it since your husband acquired it." Wilson handed her a folded paper. This is the deed. The ranch isn't much, but it's something." Julia took the document mechanically, her mind racing. "Mr. Wilson, do you have any personal effects of my husband's? Letters, perhaps?" Wilson nodded slowly. "A trunk was recovered from his hotel room. I've had it sent to the boarding house." He hesitated. "Mrs. Matthews, I should warn you your husband had a reputation here. He made promises to people, investments that never materialized." "I see." She didn't. Not fully, but the picture forming was clear enough. Her husband had been a stranger to her. That night, in the small room at Mrs. Porter's boarding house, Julia opened Edward's trunk with trembling hands. Inside, she found clothing, a journal, and several bundles of letters, some in her handwriting, others in feminine script she didn't recognize. With growing horror, she realized Edward had been corresponding with at least 3 women, making promises similar to those he'd made to her. The journal was worse. In it, Edward detailed his schemes, his movements, his fabrications. He'd been born Edward Simmons in a small Pennsylvania town, had spent time in prison for fraud, had operated under different names in different states. The Edward Matthews she'd married had been entirely fictional. Julia wept until she had no tears left, then faced the dawn with a resolve born of necessity. She had no money to return east, no family to take her, and her parents had passed years ago, and she'd been working as a governess when she met Edward. All she had was this mysterious ranch and a name, Owen Evans. The next morning, Julia hired a wagon to take her to the ranch. The driver, a grizzled old man named Fergus, filled the journey with stories about Paradise's boom and bust cycles, the mines that had produced fortunes and failures. "This Evans fella," Fergus said as they approached the ranch, "he's a good sort. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but fair. Folks respect him." The Copper Creek Ranch, as a weathered sign proclaimed it, was modest but well-maintained. A small house, a barn, several outbuildings, and grazing land stretching toward distant mountains. As the wagon pulled up, a tall man emerged from the barn, watching their approach with wary eyes. Julia's first impression of Owen Evans was one of contained strength. He stood over 6 feet tall, his frame lean but powerful, tanned skin speaking of years under the western sun. Dark hair curled beneath his hat, and his eyes, a startling blue, assessed her with undisguised surprise. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice deep with a slight drawl as he approached the wagon. He removed his hat, revealing more of that thick, dark hair. "Wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," Julia replied, accepting his hand to step down from the wagon. "Yet here I am, Mr. Evans. I understand you've been managing this property." Owen nodded, his expression guarded. "Going on 6 months now. Your husband hired me to run things when he bought the place. Said he had business interests keeping him in town. Did he visit often?" "Twice. Stayed in the house the first time. Second visit was brief." Owen glanced toward Fergus, who was unloading Julia's trunk. "Will you be staying, madam?" "I own this property, Mr. Evans. Where else would I stay?" The words came out sharper than she intended, born of exhaustion and shock. "I apologize. This has all been unexpected." Something like sympathy flickered in Owen's eyes. "No need for apologies. The house isn't much, but it's clean. My cabin's behind the barn. I'll have Fergus take your things inside." The house was indeed clean, though sparse. A main room with a kitchen area, 2 small bedrooms, simple furniture. It was nothing like the Boston townhouse Edward had promised they'd soon occupy, but it was solid and well built. "Your husband said he'd be sending furniture from back east," Owen explained as he showed her around. "Never arrived." Another lie in the tapestry of deception Edward had woven. Julia nodded, trying to hide her dismay. "Mr. Evans, I should be direct." My husband wasn't honest about many things, including this ranch. I know nothing about running such an operation. I don't even know what this property produces." Owen studied her for a moment. "Cattle, mostly. Small herd but good stock. Some horses. Garden plot provides vegetables. It's not a large operation, but it turns a modest profit. And my husband's arrangement with you. I manage the daily operations. 20% of profits plus room and board." His gaze was steady. "Mrs. Matthews, if you're planning to sell, I'm not." The decision formed even as she spoke. "I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Evans. My husband left debts, not assets. This ranch is all I have." Owen nodded slowly, seeming to come to a decision. "Then you should know what you're working with. I can show you the books after you've had a chance to rest." That evening, Julia sat at the kitchen table while Owen explained the ranch operations, the 50 head of cattle, the 6 horses, the seasonal rhythms of the work. His knowledge was extensive, his explanations clear. For the first time since receiving that fateful letter, Julia felt a glimmer of hope. "The next cattle sale is in 3 weeks, Owen concluded. "Should bring enough to see us through winter with some to spare." "Us?" Julia questioned. "Figure of speech," he replied, a hint of color touching his cheekbones. "Your ranch, madam, I just work here. Mr. Evans, I'm completely dependent on your expertise. I hope you'll stay on." Julia met his gaze directly. "However, I intend to learn. I won't remain ignorant about my only possession." A slight smile touched Owen's lips, transforming his stern features. "Fair enough, Mrs. Matthews. Lessons start tomorrow." The next morning, Julia woke before dawn, dressing in her simplest skirt and blouse. When she emerged from the house, Owen was already at work, surprised to see her so early. "First lesson," he said after a moment, "is that ranching waits for no one. Sun up to sundown, animals need tending." Over the following days, Julia threw herself into learning the ranch operations. She insisted on participating in every aspect, feeding livestock, mending fences, even learning to ride properly. Her soft hands blistered, her fair skin burned in the Nevada sun, and her muscles ached with unfamiliar labor, but she persisted. Owen proved to be a patient teacher, his initial wariness giving way to what seemed like reluctant admiration. He never commented on her struggles, but was always ready with quiet guidance when needed. A week after her arrival, as they worked together repairing a chicken coop, Julia finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "Mr. Evans, what did you really think of my husband?" Owen's hand stilled on the hammer he was using. For a long moment he didn't answer, and Julia thought he might not. "I didn't trust him," he finally said, his voice careful, "but it wasn't my place to judge." "It's your place now," Julia replied quietly. "I need to know what I'm facing in town. People have been distant." Owen sighed, setting down his tools. "Your husband made promises, investments in mines that didn't pan out, loans that weren't repaid. Some folks lost their savings." Julia closed her eyes briefly. "And they think I was part of it. Some might. Others understand you could be another victim." Owen's gaze was sympathetic. Edward Matthews was convincing. He had a way of telling people exactly what they wanted to hear. "Yes," Julia said bitterly. "I'm well aware of that talent." The following Sunday, Julia attended services at Paradise's small church, ignoring the whispers that followed her entrance. She held her head high, but her hands trembled slightly as she took a seat in the back pew. To her surprise, Owen slipped in beside her just as the service began, nodding briefly in acknowledgement. His presence beside her seemed to alter the atmosphere. After the service, several townspeople approached, offering cautious greetings. Owen introduced her to key members of the community: the doctor, the blacksmith, the general store owner. His quiet vouching for her opened doors that might have remained closed. "Thank you," Julia said as they rode back to the ranch. "You didn't have to come today." Owen adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "Figured you could use an ally." "Is that what you are, Mr. Evans? My ally?" He glanced at her, those blue eyes unreadable. "I work for you, Mrs. Matthews. I think we both know it's more complicated than that." Owen didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted, acknowledging the truth of her words. Their relationship was evolving beyond employer and employee, beyond teacher and student, into something neither of them had defined. As October turned to November, Julia settled into the rhythms of ranch life. Her days were filled with work, her evenings with studying the account books and agricultural journals Owen loaned her. She wrote to the women whose letters she'd found among Edward's possessions, warning them of his deceptions. 2 responded with gratitude. One had already lost money to his schemes. The cattle sale went better than expected, providing a financial cushion that eased Julia's immediate worries. She used some of the proceeds to purchase proper work clothes, much to the scandalized whispers of certain Paradise matrons. "A woman in trousers," Mrs. Porter had clucked disapprovingly when Julia returned to town in her new attire. "What next?" "Efficiency and practicality, I hope," Julia had replied pleasantly, growing more comfortable with her new identity as a rancher. Owen said nothing about her changed appearance, but she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression as she moved more confidently around the ranch in her practical clothing. Their working relationship had developed an easy rhythm, with Owen gradually entrusting her with more responsibilities as her skills improved. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day's work, Julia broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Mr. Evans, I've been examining the books more carefully. This ranch could support more cattle than we currently run." "It could," he agreed cautiously, "with the right investment. I've been considering selling one of the horses, the bay gelding that's more show than work horse. It could provide enough to add 10 head to our herd." Owen was silent for a moment. "That's sound thinking, but winter's coming. Might be better to wait until spring for expansion." "You're right," Julia nodded, understanding the wisdom of his caution. "Though I do appreciate you not questioning my judgment outright." A small smile touched his lips. "You've earned that much, Mrs. Matthews. You're a quick study." "Julia," she said suddenly, "please, after all this time, I'd prefer you call me Julia." His eyes met hers, something flickering in their depths. "Julia," he said softly, testing the name. "Then I'm Owen." It was a small thing, this exchange of given names, but it marked a shift in their relationship, an acknowledgement of growing trust, perhaps even friendship. The first snow came in early December, transforming the ranch into a white blanketed wonderland. Julia woke to find Owen had already cleared paths to the barn and outbuildings, fed the livestock, and started a fire in her kitchen stove. "You didn't have to do all this," she said when he came in for the morning coffee that had become their ritual. "Wanted you to see your first Nevada snow proper-like," he replied with a rare, full smile. "It's different from Boston snow." Julia looked at him in surprise. "How did you know I was from Boston?" A shadow crossed his face. "Your husband mentioned it, said you were used to finer things." "Edward said many things, few of them true." Julia poured coffee for them both. "I was a governess in Boston, not some society lady." Edward embellished his prospects when we met. Owen's eyes held hers. "Seems like he embellished just about everything." "Yes, I've been a fool." "No." His response was immediate and firm. "Being deceived doesn't make you a fool, Julia. It makes him a liar." The conviction in his voice warmed her more than the coffee. Over the past weeks, she'd come to value Owen's steadiness, his straightforward nature. He never said anything he didn't mean, never promised what he couldn't deliver. After Edward's elaborate fabrications, Owen's honesty was like solid ground beneath her feet. As winter deepened, they fell into new routines. The shorter days meant more evenings spent in the house, where Owen would sometimes join Julia for dinner. She discovered he was well-read, with opinions on everything from cattle breeding to politics. Their conversations often lasted well into the night, revealing layers to Owen Evans that his quiet exterior concealed. He'd been a soldier in the war, she learned, had worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, had once owned a small ranch in Colorado before drought and bad luck forced him to sell. He spoke little of family, only mentioning a sister in San Francisco who wrote occasionally. Christmas approached, bringing with it a melancholy that Julia couldn't entirely suppress. Despite Edward's betrayals, this would be her first Christmas as a widow, in a place far from anything familiar. Owen seemed to sense her mood, returning from town one day with a small pine tree in the wagon bed. "Thought the house could use some cheer," he said gruffly when she expressed surprise. Together, they set up the tree in the main room, decorating it with simple ornaments Julia crafted from bits of colored paper and ribbon. Owen contributed carved wooden stars he'd made in the evenings, their delicate patterns revealing yet another hidden talent. On Christmas Eve, they shared a special dinner, a roast chicken with vegetables from their root cellar, and an apple pie Julia had baked from preserved fruit. After dinner, Owen presented her with a gift, a beautifully crafted leather journal. "Noticed you writing in that little book that's almost full," he explained, suddenly seeming unsure of himself. "Thought you might need another." Julia touched the smooth leather, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect, Owen. I have something for you as well." She gave him a hand-knitted scarf, made from wool she'd purchased in town and worked on secretly during the evenings. "Didn't know you could knit," he said, running his fingers along the careful stitches. "One of many skills from my governess days," she admitted. "Though I'm better with embroidery." Owen wrapped the scarf around his neck, the dark blue wool setting off his eyes. "Thank you. Been a while since anyone made me something." Julia found herself studying his face, the strong lines softened in the lamplight, the usual reserve in his expression replaced by genuine warmth. She'd grown so accustomed to his presence, his steadiness, that the thought of the ranch without him seemed unimaginable. As if reading her thoughts, Owen spoke quietly. "Julia, there's something I should tell you. Come spring, I've been thinking it might be time for me to move on." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Move on? Why? You've learned the operation. You're making this place your own." He looked down at his hands. "And there's talk in town. A widow and a single man working alone together. People gossip." "I don't care about gossip," Julia protested, surprised by the vehemence in her voice. "Maybe you should. You're building a life here. Reputation matters." "So does having someone I can trust." Julia met his gaze directly. "I trust you, Owen, more than anyone I've ever known." Something shifted in his eyes, a flash of emotion quickly controlled. "That means a great deal, but it doesn't change the situation. What if it could?" The words were out before Julia could consider them fully. "What if there was a way for you to stay that would silence the gossips?" Owen went very still. "Julia, I'm not proposing we marry," she clarified quickly, feeling heat rise to her cheeks, "but perhaps a more formal business arrangement. A partnership in the ranch rather than employment." The tension in his shoulders eased, though something like disappointment flickered across his face. "That's worth considering. We can discuss it after the holidays." The moment had become awkward, the easy companionship of earlier disrupted by unspoken currents. Owen soon made his excuses, returning to his cabin despite the cold night. Alone, Julia sat by the dying fire, turning the leather journal in her hands. She hadn't intended to suggest a partnership. The idea had formed as she spoke, born of panic at the thought of losing Owen's presence in her daily life. But why had that thought caused such panic? And why had she felt compelled to clarify that she wasn't suggesting marriage? The answer came slowly, reluctantly. In the months since arriving at Copper Creek, Julia had developed feelings for Owen Evans, feelings that went beyond respect and friendship. Somewhere between fence mending and cattle counting, between morning coffee and evening conversations, she had begun to care for him in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. After Edward's betrayal, Julia had promised herself she would never again be vulnerable to a man's deceptions. Yet Owen was nothing like Edward. Where Edward had been all smooth words and empty promises, Owen was actions and quiet integrity. He said what he meant, did what he promised, stood by his word even when it cost him. The revelation kept Julia awake well into the night, her thoughts churning with possibilities and fears. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would offer Owen a true partnership in the ranch, but she would guard her heart more carefully. She couldn't risk another devastating loss. The day after Christmas brought heavy snow, keeping them both busy with essential ranch work. Owen was polite but distant, clearly still unsettled by their Christmas Eve conversation. It wasn't until New Year's Eve that they found themselves alone together again, taking inventory of supplies in the barn. "About what I said at Christmas," Julia began, breaking the awkward silence between them. "I've given it more thought. A formal partnership makes sense for the ranch. You know this land, these animals. Your expertise is invaluable." Owen continued counting feed sacks, his back to her. "And what would this partnership look like? Equal share in profits, joint decisions on major purchases or sales, legal documentation to protect both our interests." Julia kept her tone businesslike. "I can have Mr. Wilson draw up the papers." Owen turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Why? I told you. Your expertise, no," he interrupted, stepping closer. "Why offer this now? You could hire any ranch manager. Paradise has plenty of men looking for work." Julia met his gaze, determined to be honest even if she couldn't reveal everything. "Because I trust you, Owen. Because in the short time I've known you, you've shown more integrity than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. Because this ranch is beginning to feel like home and you're part of the reason why." He studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. "All right, partnership, but I want to be clear about something." "Yes. I'm not your husband, Julia. I won't lie to you. Won't make promises I can't keep." His voice was low, intense. "What you see is what you get with me." "I know that," she whispered. "It's why I trust you." Something passed between them in that moment, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a deeper connection neither was ready to name. Owen broke the tension with a small smile. "Partner," he said, extending his hand. Julia took it, feeling the strength in his calloused palm. "Partner." The partnership papers were drawn up in the first week of January, causing no small stir in Paradise. Julia ignored the whispers, focusing instead on the plans she and Owen were developing for spring planting and herd expansion. They worked well together, her education and organizational skills complementing his practical knowledge. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the land. February brought milder temperatures and the first signs of the coming thaw. Julia found herself watching Owen more often, noting the grace of his movements as he worked with the horses, the rare smile that transformed his face when something pleased him, the quiet patience he showed when teaching her new skills. One afternoon, as they rode the property boundaries checking for winter damage to the fences, Owen suddenly reined his horse to a stop, looking toward the distant road. "Riders coming," he said, his voice tense. "Stay here." Julia ignored the instruction, urging her horse forward to join him. Through the clear winter air, she could make out 3 men approaching on horseback. "You recognize them?" she asked. Owen's expression had hardened. "The one in front. Name's Harlan Blackwood. Had dealings with your husband." The name was familiar from Edward's journal, a mining investor who had lost money in one of his schemes. Julia felt a cold knot of apprehension form in her stomach. The riders approached slowly, deliberately. The man in the lead was expensively dressed, his black coat and hat contrasting sharply with his pale, narrow face. He surveyed the ranch with obvious contempt before fixing his gaze on Julia. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, touching the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "I've been looking forward to making your acquaintance." "Mr. Blackwood," Julia acknowledged coolly. "What brings you to Copper Creek? Unfinished business with your late husband." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "He owed me a considerable sum. In his absence, I've come to collect from his estate. Any claims against my husband's estate should be directed to Mr. Wilson in town," Julia replied. "He's handling such matters. I've spoken with Wilson. He claims there's nothing left except this ranch." Blackwood's gaze swept over the property. "I propose a simple solution. Sign over the deed to me and I'll consider the debt settled." Owen moved his horse slightly forward, positioning himself between Julia and Blackwood. "The ranch isn't part of Matthews's estate. It's Mrs. Matthews's property, legally transferred before his death." "A convenient transfer," Blackwood sneered. "Just days before his accident. Rather suspicious timing, wouldn't you say?" Julia felt a chill at his emphasis on the word accident. "Are you suggesting something, Mr. Blackwood?" "I'm suggesting that Edward Matthews defrauded me of $10,000. I'm suggesting that his death and this property transfer were perhaps not coincidental." Blackwood's voice hardened. "I'm suggesting that I will have what's owed to me, one way or another." "You're trespassing," Owen stated flatly. "I suggest you leave." Blackwood's 2 companions, hard-looking men with hands resting near their holstered pistols, shifted in their saddles, but Blackwood himself merely smiled. "Evans, isn't it? The hired help." His dismissive tone made the words an insult. "This isn't your concern." "Actually," Julia interjected, "Mr. Evans is my business partner. This is very much his concern." Surprise flickered across Blackwood's face before his expression settled back into calculated menace. "Partnership or not, my claim stands. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider my offer, Mrs. Matthews. After that, things might become difficult." With that parting threat, Blackwood wheeled his horse around, his men following as they rode away from the ranch. "We should go to the sheriff," Julia said once they were out of earshot. Owen shook his head. "Sheriff Carter's a good man, but he can't do much about threats. Blackwood's careful stays just on the legal side of things." "Then what do we do? Be vigilant. And I think we should look more closely at your husband's death." Owen's expression was grim. Blackwood implied it wasn't an accident. That evening they went through Edward's papers again, searching for any connection to Blackwood. In the journal, they found references to a mining venture called the Silver Bell, the investment that had apparently cost Blackwood his money. "Edward wrote that the mine was producing silver," Julia said, reading from the journal. "But according to these later entries, the assayer's reports were falsified. There was no silver." Owen frowned. "So Edward took Blackwood's investment knowing the mine was worthless, it appears so, and others' money as well." Julia felt sick at the extent of her husband's deceptions. "But that doesn't explain why he put the ranch in my name. According to this, he bought it with some of Blackwood's investment. Protection, maybe. If he knew people would come after his assets, putting property in your name would shield it." Julia considered this. Or perhaps he actually felt guilty. This is the only property he transferred to me. Everything else he kept in his name. They continued searching through the papers late into the night, finally discovering a letter from the mine foreman describing unsafe conditions at the Silver Bell. The letter, dated just days before Edward's death, warned of potential cave-ins if proper supports weren't installed. "He died in a mine accident," Julia whispered. "What if it was this mine? What if he went there after the foreman's warning? Tomorrow we'll go to Paradise," Owen decided. "Talk to Wilson. See what he knows about how Edward actually died." Morning brought fresh concerns. One of their calves was missing, and they found a section of fence deliberately cut. The message from Blackwood was clear. The threats had begun. They rode into Paradise with a sense of urgency, heading directly to Wilson's office. The attorney seemed nervous as he confirmed their suspicions. "Yes, it was the Silver Bell mine where your husband died," Wilson admitted. "There was a collapse in one of the deeper tunnels. Several men were killed." "Was there an investigation?" Owen asked. Wilson shuffled papers on his desk. "A cursory one. Mining accidents are common enough." "And Harlan Blackwood, what was his connection to the mine beyond his investment?" "Blackwood was pushing for faster development, more tunnels. Some say he insisted on cutting corners to increase profits." Wilson looked uncomfortable. "There were rumors that he and your husband argued the day before the collapse." Julia exchanged a significant look with Owen. "Mr. Wilson, we have reason to believe Blackwood may be threatening us. He came to the ranch yesterday demanding I sign over the property." Wilson's face paled. "Mrs. Matthews, I would advise caution. Blackwood is a powerful man in these parts. He owns the largest hotel in town and has connections with territorial officials. We can't just give him the ranch," Owen stated firmly. "No, but—" Wilson hesitated. "Perhaps a compromise. Offer him a portion of the profits from the ranch operations." Julia shook her head. "He made it clear he wants the property itself, not money. I think there's more to this than Edward's debt." They left Wilson's office with more questions than answers. As they walked down Paradise's Main Street, Julia noticed people watching them, conversations stopping as they passed. The tension was palpable. "They know something's brewing," Owen muttered, nodding toward a group of men outside the saloon. "Word travels fast in a small town." "Let's visit the assayer's office," Julia suggested. "If Edward falsified reports about the Silver Bell, maybe there's evidence there." The assayer, a nervous man named Perkins, initially claimed to have no records of the Silver Bell mine. When Owen pressed him, suggesting they could return with Sheriff Carter, Perkins reluctantly produced a file. "These are the official reports," he said, pushing papers across his desk. "Showing trace silver, not enough for profitable mining." "And the reports that were shown to investors?" Julia asked pointedly. Perkins swallowed hard. "Your husband brought his own samples, paid me to verify them without questioning their source. They showed rich silver deposits." "Fraud," Owen stated flatly. "Yes," Perkins admitted, "but I wasn't the only one involved. Blackwood knew the truth before most investors. He pulled his own money out early, then encouraged others to invest." Julia stared at him in shock. "Are you saying Blackwood was working with Edward to defraud investors?" "Until something went wrong between them," Perkins confirmed. "About a week before the accident, they had a terrible argument in my office. Blackwood accused your husband of double-crossing him over something to do with the ranch property." The pieces were beginning to fit together. Julia felt a cold certainty forming. The ranch must be valuable for some reason Edward discovered. That's why he transferred it to me, to keep it from Blackwood. But what could make a small cattle ranch so valuable? Owen wondered. Their answer came unexpectedly as they were leaving town. Sheriff Carter approached on horseback, his expression grim. "Mrs. Matthews Evans," he greeted them. "Heard you've had trouble with Blackwood." "Word travels fast," Owen remarked. Carter nodded. "Wanted to warn you, there's been a gold strike about 2 miles north of your property. Still quiet, but won't be for long, if your land has the same rock formations." Julia felt her breath catch. "That's why Blackwood wants the ranch." "Likely," Carter agreed. "Be careful. Blackwood doesn't take disappointment well." As they rode back to Copper Creek, Julia and Owen discussed their options. The property could indeed be sitting on gold deposits, which would explain Edward's interest in it and his decision to keep it from Blackwood when their partnership soured. "We should check the north boundary," Owen suggested. "See if there's any sign of the same rock formations." They spent the next day exploring the northern section of the ranch, finding promising indicators that the gold-bearing quartz might extend onto their property. The discovery brought mixed feelings: excitement at the potential wealth, concern about what Blackwood might do to claim it. That evening, as they discussed their findings over dinner, Julia found herself watching Owen's face in the lamplight. The months of working together had changed him, softened the lines of his face, brought light to his eyes. Or perhaps it was simply that she saw him differently now. "Owen," she said suddenly, "if there is gold, what would you want to do with it?" He considered the question seriously. "Improve the ranch, better stock, maybe expand the herd, build a proper house." He glanced around the simple cabin. "What about you?" Julia thought about it. 6 months ago, she might have said return to Boston, reclaim the life she thought she would have. Now the answer was different. "Stay," she said simply. "Build something real, something honest." Their eyes met across the table, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Owen reached out, hesitantly covering her hand with his. "Julia," he began, but was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass as a rock crashed through the window. They both leapt to their feet, Owen grabbing his rifle from beside the door while Julia extinguished the lamp. In the sudden darkness, they could see flames spreading across the barn roof. "Fire!" Owen shouted, already running toward the door. "Get water!" The next hours passed in a desperate struggle to save the barn and the animals inside. Julia worked alongside Owen, hauling water from the well, leading frightened horses to safety, fighting smoke and exhaustion. By dawn, they had managed to save most of the barn and all the animals, but the damage was extensive. As they stood surveying the charred timbers in the gray morning light, Sheriff Carter arrived with several townsmen who had seen the smoke. "Blackwood?" Carter asked grimly, dismounting from his horse. Owen nodded, his face streaked with soot, one arm supporting an equally exhausted Julia. "Has to be." "No proof," Carter said, examining the remains of a kerosene-soaked torch found near the barn. "But I'll have a word with him." The townsmen helped secure the damaged barn, offering assistance and expressions of support that surprised Julia. Despite the month she'd lived in paradise, she had still felt like an outsider until now. In the face of this attack, the community was rallying around them. "People know Blackwood's type," Owen explained as they watched the men work. "They've seen his kind before, men who use money and threats to take what they want. Nobody likes it, but few stand against it directly." "Until now," Julia noted. Owen's arm tightened briefly around her shoulders. "You've made an impression, Julia Matthews. Standing your ground, learning to ranch, facing down someone like Blackwood. People respect that." The sheriff's word with Blackwood proved ineffective. 2 days later, water from their well tasted of kerosene deliberately poisoned overnight. Then fence lines were cut again, allowing cattle to stray. Each incident came with a note: "Sell while you can." "He's escalating," Owen said grimly after they'd spent hours rounding up scattered cattle. "Next time could be worse." "We won't be intimidated," Julia insisted, though fear was a constant companion now. She slept with a loaded shotgun beside her bed, startling at every nocturnal sound. Their fears were justified when, a week after the barn fire, 3 masked men attempted to break into the house in the middle of the night. Only Owen's vigilance prevented a disaster. He had taken to sleeping on the porch and confronted them with his rifle, driving them off with warning shots. The next morning they rode into Paradise together, determined to take more direct action. The sheriff was sympathetic, but limited in what he could do without proof of Blackwood's involvement. Wilson advised patience, suggesting that Blackwood would eventually tire of his campaign. "He won't stop," Owen argued, "not with gold at stake." As they walked from Wilson's office, a commotion near the telegraph office caught their attention. A crowd had gathered, excitement buzzing through the group. "It's confirmed," someone shouted. "Biggest gold strike in Nevada history, just north of here." The news spread like wildfire through Paradise. Within hours, the first wagons of prospectors were arriving, men with dreams of fortune in their eyes heading toward the strike site. "This changes everything," Julia realized as they rode back to the ranch. "Blackwood will be even more determined now." Her prediction proved accurate. That evening, Blackwood himself rode to Copper Creek, flanked by 6 armed men. They formed an ominous semicircle in front of the house as Blackwood dismounted. "Last chance, Mrs. Matthews," he called out. $5,000 for the ranch, papers signed tonight, or we take it anyway." Owen and Julia stood side by side on the porch, both armed. "This is private property, Blackwood," Owen stated coldly. "Leave now." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Evans, always the loyal dog. Did Mrs. Matthews tell you how her husband died? How he begged for mercy before the tunnel collapsed on him?" Julia felt her blood freeze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying accidents can be arranged," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Just as they were for Edward when he tried to cheat me." "You murdered my husband," Julia whispered, the realization striking her with horrifying clarity. "Let's call it a business disagreement with fatal consequences." Blackwood's gaze hardened, one that could be repeated if necessary. Owen's rifle came up smoothly, aimed at Blackwood's chest. "You've just confessed to murder in front of witnesses." "My word against yours," Blackwood shrugged, "and I have more friends in this territory than you do, Evans." The standoff might have ended in violence if not for the arrival of Sheriff Carter, riding hard with several deputies. The sudden appearance of law enforcement caused Blackwood's men to shift nervously. "Blackwood," Carter called out, "step away from that property." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwood might order his men to fight. Then, with calculated slowness, he remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he promised before riding away, his men following reluctantly. Carter approached the porch, his expression grave. "Got word Blackwood was making threats." "Came as quick as I could." He looked at Julia. "Mrs. Matthews, I think you should both come to town tonight. Safer there." They followed Carter's advice, spending a restless night at Paradise's hotel. In the morning, shocking news awaited them. The assayer, Perkins, had been found dead in his office, apparently from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Beside him was a signed confession detailing the fraud scheme involving the Silver Bell mine and naming Blackwood as the mastermind who had ordered the sabotage that killed Edward Matthews and 5 miners. "Convenient suicide," Owen commented grimly when they heard the news. Carter nodded. "Too convenient. But the confession changes things. I've sent telegrams to the territorial authorities. Blackwood won't escape investigation this time." The investigation moved with surprising speed. By afternoon, territorial marshals had arrived and Blackwood was being held for questioning. His men, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quickly distanced themselves from their employer. For Julia, the confirmation of Edward's murder brought complex emotions. Despite his lies and deceptions, she had never wished him such a violent end. Yet there was also a strange closure in knowing the truth at last. "What happens now?" she asked Owen as they prepared to return to Copper Creek, the immediate danger apparently past. "We rebuild," he replied simply. "Fix the barn, mend fences, continue what we started." In the weeks that followed, life gradually returned to normal at Copper Creek. Blackwood was held for trial, his empire crumbling as investors withdrew their support and evidence of multiple frauds emerged. The gold strike north of the ranch proved rich, but limited in extent, valuable enough to bring prosperity to the region, but not the massive deposit initially reported. Surveys confirmed that a modest vein extended onto Copper Creek's northern boundary. Julia and Owen decided to lease those mineral rights rather than mine themselves, providing income to improve the ranch without disrupting their primary operations. With spring came new calves, fresh growth, and plans for the future. The partnership between Julia and Owen had deepened into something neither of them named, but both acknowledged in small ways, hands touching as they worked. Quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset, growing ease in each other's company. One such evening, almost a year after Julia's arrival at Copper Creek, Owen returned from town with news that Blackwood had been convicted of multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. "It's finally over," Julia said as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch. "Edward Blackwood, all of it." Owen nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains gilded by the setting sun. "New beginnings." "Yes." Julia studied his profile, the strong lines softened in the golden light. "Owen, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." He turned to look at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "What's that?" "Our partnership agreement. It's for 5 years." "I remember." Julia took a deep breath. "I was thinking we might want to consider a more permanent arrangement." Owen went very still. "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind?" "The kind that lasts a lifetime," she said softly. "If you're interested." For a moment, Owen didn't speak and Julia felt her heart beating painfully in her chest. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. "Julia Matthews," he said, his voice low and earnest. "From the day you arrived at Copper Creek, all determination and city clothes, I've been falling in love with you. Your courage, your honesty, your willingness to learn and work and fight for what's yours. I just never thought that I might feel the same." Julia smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "How could I not, Owen? After Edward's lies, you showed me what honesty looks like, what integrity feels like. You never pretended to be anything other than exactly who you are." Owen's free hand came up to touch her cheek gently. "And who I am is a man who loves you, who wants to build a life with you if you'll have me." "I will," Julia whispered, leaning into his touch. "I do." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, then deepening with the certainty of their feelings. When they finally drew apart, Owen's smile held all the promise Julia had ever hoped to find. "Partner," he said softly, echoing their earlier agreement but investing the word with new meaning. "Partner," Julia agreed, "in everything from now on." They were married 2 weeks later in Paradise's small church, the same one where Owen had stood beside Julia nearly a year before as her ally and friend. The town turned out in force to celebrate, no longer viewing Julia as an outsider, but as one of their own. A woman who had faced adversity with courage and built something honest from the ruins of deception. As spring turned to summer, Julia and Owen expanded the ranch operations, adding new breeding stock and hiring 2 young cowboys to help with the increased workload. The house grew too, with a new wing added to accommodate their hopes for a family. Those hopes were realized the following spring when Julia gave birth to a son they named Thomas, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, a daughter, Eleanor, joined their family, completing the home that had once seemed an impossible dream to Julia. Copper Creek Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. The gold lease provided additional income, but it was the cattle business built on honest work and sound decisions that formed the foundation of their success. On the 5th anniversary of Julia's arrival in Paradise, she stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching Owen teach 4-year-old Thomas how to ride his first pony while Eleanor, now 2, played nearby. The sight filled her heart with a joy she had once thought beyond her reach. Edward's lies had brought her to Nevada, but Owen's honesty had given her a home. His love had shown her that truth, however simple, was worth more than the most elaborate fiction. Together, they had built something real on that foundation: a ranch, a family, a life of purpose and integrity. As Owen looked up and caught her watching, his smile contained all the honesty and love that had changed her world. Julia smiled back, secure in the knowledge that some promises were kept, some partnerships endured, and some loves truly lasted a lifetime. In the clear Nevada light, Copper Creek Ranch stood as testament to what could grow from truth, a legacy of honesty that would endure long after the gold in the hills had been forgotten.